The Rex bombardment had been falling on Terran colony Epsilon 7 for 3 standard hours. When Commander Valeria Nexos first heard the enemy laughter echoing across the cratered landscape, through her tactical visor, she watched the alien artillery. Shells explode in perfect geometric patterns across the settlement's outer perimeter, each blast meticulously calculated to maximize psychological terror while preserving infrastructure for future occupation. "They're toying with us," muttered Lieutenant Caspian Vol, crouched beside her in the reinforced command bunker. His words were punctuated by another earth-shaking detonation that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. 40,000 colonists down there, and they're treating this like target practice. Nexos adjusted her scope's magnification and focused on the Rex forward positions. The insectoid aliens stood tall on their 6 legs, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming purple-black in the artificial twilight created by the bombardment smoke clouds. Several Rex soldiers had removed their combat helmets, mandibles clicking in what their xenolinguists had identified as expressions of amusement. They were laughing. The Rex Empire had swept through 17 human colonies in the past 6 months. Their conquest strategy as efficient as it was cruel. They would bombard civilian areas with surgical precision, creating maximum fear while leaving critical infrastructure intact. Then, when the human defenders emerged to protect their families, the real slaughter would begin. No human military unit had lasted more than 4 hours against a full Rex assault force. Epsilon 7's defenders consisted of the 47th Colonial Guard Regiment, 2,000 men and women, who had signed up to fight pirates and smugglers, not an alien war machine that had perfected the art of psychological warfare over 3 millennia. Most of Nexos's soldiers were farmers, engineers, and shopkeepers who had learned to fire a rifle during weekend training exercises. They had never seen combat, never watched friends die, never faced an enemy that viewed them as nothing more than amusing insects to be crushed at leisure. Signal from Bunker 77, reported Sergeant Talogrim, her communications specialist. The Hastings family shelter took a direct hit. No survivors. Nexos closed her eyes briefly. The Hastings had run the colony's primary medical facility. Their 12-year-old daughter, Nira, had wanted to become a starship pilot. The girl had asked Nexos about Fleet Academy requirements just last week. During the commander's routine patrol through the residential district, another wave of Rex laughter drifted across no man's land, carried by the acrid wind. The aliens were in no hurry. They had deployed only a fraction of their available forces, treating the operation as a training exercise for their junior warriors. Intelligence reports suggested they had at least 12,000 troops in reserve, backed by heavy armor and air support that could glass the entire colony in minutes, if properly motivated. But something about their casual approach bothered Nexos. The Rex were methodical conquerors, not sadists. They had built their empire through efficient brutality, not elaborate psychological games. Yet here they were, drawing out what should have been a 30-minute massacre into an hours-long spectacle. "Commander," Vol said, studying his tactical display, "they're repositioning their artillery. Looks like they're targeting the agricultural domes next." The agricultural domes housed Epsilon 7 seed banks and genetic archives, irreplaceable resources that represented decades of terraforming research. If the Rex destroyed those facilities, they would effectively erase humanity's foothold in this entire star system. More importantly, 300 civilians had taken shelter in those domes. Believing the thick biosteel walls would protect them, Nexos activated her command frequency, broadcasting to all units, all squads. "This is command. Enemy is repositioning for strike on agricultural sector. We cannot allow those facilities to fall. Prepare for full defensive deployment." As her soldiers acknowledged the order, Nexos noticed something odd in the tactical display. The colony's seismic sensors, originally installed to monitor the terraforming process, were registering unusual readings. The bombardment should have produced chaotic vibration patterns, but the sensors showed something almost rhythmic, as if the explosions were creating some kind of harmonic resonance in the planet's crust. She dismissed the readings as equipment malfunction. After all, what could be more important than the alien army that was systematically destroying everything she had sworn to protect? The Rex laughter grew louder, more confident, as their artillery crews loaded fresh ammunition for the next phase of their leisurely conquest. Nexos had no way of knowing that Epsilon 7's original survey team had made a discovery they had classified far above her security clearance. She had no idea that the planet's crust contained crystalline formations that had been dormant for millions of years, waiting for the right frequency to awaken. Most importantly, she could not have imagined that the Vrex's methodical bombardment was about to trigger something that would make their laughter seem like whispers. Compared to what was stirring beneath their feet, the ground was beginning to listen. The Vrex artillery barrage shifted toward the agricultural domes with mechanical precision, each shell programmed to create maximum structural damage while preserving the valuable genetic archives within. Commander Nexos watched through her tactical scope as the first wave of explosions blossomed across the dome complex, the biosteel walls buckling but holding against the carefully calculated impacts. "Sir, we're getting seismic readings that don't match the bombardment pattern," Sergeant Grimm reported, her voice tight with confusion. "The sensors are showing some kind of harmonic buildup in the subsurface layers." Nexos ignored the report, focusing on the immediate tactical situation. The Vrex were moving forward, under cover of their artillery, their six-legged gait carrying them across the broken terrain with disturbing grace. Through her scope, she could see individual alien soldiers, their mandibles still clicking with amusement as they advanced toward the human defensive positions. "All units, prepare to engage," she commanded. "Wait for my signal." The 47th Colonial Guard had positioned themselves in a network of trenches and bunkers designed to channel the Vrex advance into predetermined kill zones. It was a textbook defensive strategy that might have worked against human opponents. Against an alien military force that had conquered dozens of worlds, it would buy them perhaps an hour of survival. Lieutenant Vol crouched beside her, his assault rifle trained on the approaching enemy line. "Contact in 30 seconds, he whispered. "Recommend we target their command elements first." Nexos identified the Vrex unit leaders by their distinctive crimson markings and slightly larger exoskeletons. The aliens moved with absolute confidence, their weapons held casually as they approached the human positions. Several stopped to examine particularly impressive shell craters, pointing with their secondary arms and sharing what appeared to be professional observations about explosive yield efficiency. "They're not even taking cover," Vol muttered. "It's like they're on a goddamn sightseeing tour." The first Vrex soldier reached the outer perimeter wire when the ground beneath him erupted. In a geyser of superheated steam and molten rock, the aliens screamed a sound like tearing metal, mixed with dying wind chimes cut through the bombardment noise. As the creature was launched 30 meters into the air, its exoskeleton already beginning to char, more geysers erupted along the Vrex advance line. The aliens, who had been laughing moments before, now chittered in alarm. As the planet itself seemed to turn against them, cracks appeared in the ground, glowing with inner heat that had nothing to do with human weapons or Vrex artillery. "What the hell?" Vol started, but Nexos cut him off. "All units, engage. Take them while they're disrupted." The Colonial Guard opened fire with everything they had. Pulse rifles cracked across the battlefield, their blue-white beams striking Vrex exoskeletons and sending the aliens tumbling. Grenades arced through the smoke-filled air, their explosions adding to the chaos as more sections of ground began venting superheated gases. A Vrex warrior, its left secondary arm severed by pulse fire, stumbled toward Nexos's position. She put 3 rounds center mass, watching the alien's chitin crack and leak yellowish fluid before it collapsed. Behind it, 2 more Vrex soldiers fired their plasma weapons toward the human trenches, the green bolts searing the air and melting sections of their defensive walls. Private Corin Dex, a 19-year-old who had been working in his family's hydroponics facilities 6 months ago, screamed as a plasma bolt caught him across the chest. The beam carved through his combat armor like it was made of paper, leaving a smoking crater where his heart had been. He fell backward into Sergeant Maya Toll, who shoved his corpse aside and continued firing her heavy pulse cannon at the advancing aliens. "They're breaking through Sector 4. Reported Corporal Finn Rask over the tactical frequency. Need immediate support." Nexos switched to Sector 4's camera feed and saw Vrex soldiers pouring through a gap in their defenses. The aliens moved with fluid coordination, covering each other's advance while their heavy weapons teams set up suppressing fire positions. 3 human defenders lay motionless near the breach, their bodies twisted at unnatural angles. But even as the Vrex pressed their attack, more sections of ground began to heave and crack. What had started as isolated geysers now spread across the entire battlefield like some vast underground network was awakening. The aliens' confident advance faltered as warriors found themselves leaping over chasms, that opened without warning, or dodging jets of molten material that erupted from seemingly solid ground. Lieutenant Vole fired a rocket-propelled grenade at a cluster of wrecked soldiers. The explosion caught the aliens directly, their exoskeletons fragmenting in sprays of chitin and ichor. A third warrior, wounded but still mobile, raised its plasma rifle toward Vole's position just as the ground beneath it split open. The alien fell into a glowing crack that sealed itself moments later, cutting off its death scream with disturbing finality. "Sir, the seismic activity is accelerating," Grim reported. "Whatever's happening down there, it's spreading." Nexos ducked as Rex returned fire scorched the air above her position. She could hear her soldiers dying Jensen's agonized cry as plasma fire took off his arm. Morrison's final curse as a Rex warrior's monomolecular blade found a gap in his armor. But she could also hear something else. The Rex laughter had stopped. The aliens were no longer treating this as an amusing training exercise. Their tactical formations tightened as they found themselves fighting both human defenders and an increasingly hostile planet. What should have been a leisurely conquest was becoming something they had never experienced before. A fair fight. A massive tremor shook the battlefield, strong enough to knock both humans and aliens off their feet. In the distance, Nexos could see Rex artillery pieces toppling as the ground beneath them shifted. The aliens' methodical bombardment had ceased, their crews too busy dealing with the geological chaos erupting around their positions. For the first time since the attack began, Nexos allowed herself a moment of hope. Whatever was happening beneath Epsilon 7's surface, it was turning the tide of battle. The question was whether her surviving troops could capitalize on the opportunity. Before the Rex adapted to this new threat, the ground was no longer just listening, it was beginning to respond. The Rex command response was swift and merciless. Within minutes of the first geological eruptions, their orbital platforms began raining kinetic penetrators onto the battlefield. Tungsten rods fired from high orbit at relativistic speeds, each impact creating a crater the size of a city block. The message was clear. If the planet wanted to fight back, they would level it completely. Commander Nexos felt the shock waves from the orbital strikes ripple through the command bunker. As she coordinated her scattered forces, half of her tactical displays had gone dark, their sensor rays destroyed by either Rex weapons or the increasingly violent geological activity. The remaining feeds showed a hellscape of fire, steam, and alien soldiers adapting to conditions they had never encountered. "Sector 7 is gone," reported Corporal Rask, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Direct kinetic strike. No survivors." That was 60 more of her people dead in an instant. Men and women who had been farmers and shopkeepers 3 hours ago, vaporized by a weapon that struck with the force of a small nuclear warhead. Nexos added their names to the growing list of casualties that already included nearly half her regiment. Lieutenant Vole stumbled into the command center, his left arm hanging useless at his side, and his tactical armor scored by plasma burns. "The Rex are pulling back to regroup," he gasped. "But they're bringing up their heavy assault platforms." Saw at least 6 Devastator units moving through the northern approach. Devastators were walking tanks the size of buildings, armed with weapons capable of reducing mountain ranges to glass. Each one carried enough firepower to level what remained of the colony. Against 6 of them, Nexos' surviving 1,200 troops might as well be throwing rocks. The ground beneath them shuddered again, this time with enough violence to crack the bunker's reinforced walls. Sergeant Grimm's equipment sparked and smoked as another seismic surge overloaded her systems. "Sir, the readings are off the charts," she reported, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's like the entire planetary crust is resonating at some frequency I've never seen before." Through the periscope, Nexos watched steam vents erupting across the battlefield in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The Rex had adapted quickly, using their superior mobility to avoid the worst of the geological chaos while maintaining tactical cohesion. But she could see frustration in their movements. What should have been a routine massacre was costing them time, resources, and soldier morale. A communication burst from the colony's civilian shelters crackled through the static. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez in Shelter Complex 9. We have wounded who need immediate evacuation. Repeat, we have civilians dying down here." Nexos closed her eyes. Shelter Complex 9 housed the colony's children, over 800 kids ranging from infants to teenagers. If she pulled troops back to evacuate them, the Rex would break through her defensive line and slaughter everyone. If she held position, Those children would die slowly in the collapsed shelter. As their life support systems failed, Commander Vol said quietly, "We can't save them all." She knew he was right. Every military manual, every tactical doctrine, every lesson from humanity's long history of warfare said the same thing. Sacrifice the few to save the many. Hold the line at all costs. Die hard and take as many enemies with you as possible. But Nexos had joined the Colonial Guard to protect these people, not to make calculated decisions about which ones deserve to die first. "Signal all units," she commanded. "Tactical withdrawal to secondary positions. We're going to punch a corridor through the shelter Complex 9. Vol stared at her. "Sir, that's suicide. The Rex will overrun our flanks the moment we start moving. Then, we better move fast." The breakout began with a coordinated assault on the Rex left flank, where the aliens had positioned themselves near a series of natural ridges. Sergeant Toll led the charge with her heavy weapons squad, their pulse cannons cutting through alien formations, while the ground continued its violent rebellion beneath their feet. Private Nash Keller, barely 21 and fresh from technical school, found himself face to face with a Rex warrior as they crossed the broken terrain. The alien's plasma rifle had jammed, its weapon sparking with electrical discharge. Keller drove his monomolecular combat knife into the gap between the creature's head and thorax, twisting the blade until ichor sprayed across his visor. The Rex collapsed, its mandibles still clicking weakly as it died. Behind Keller, the ground split open in a new fissure that swallowed more Rex soldiers. But the aliens' discipline held. They reformed their lines with mechanical precision, bringing their superior numbers to bear against the human breakthrough attempt. Corporal Daria Venn, leading the evacuation team towards Shelter Complex 9, watched a kinetic penetrator strike the colony's water processing facility. The explosion sent a mushroom cloud of steam and debris 3 kilometers into the air, the shock wave flattening everything within 1,000 meters. When the dust cleared, a glowing crater marked where 50,000 colonists had depended on clean water to survive. "Medical team down," screamed Medic Torres over the tactical frequency. Rex heavy weapon took out the entire field hospital. Nexos felt each loss like a physical blow. Her people were dying by the dozens, their bodies broken by alien weapons, while the planet itself seemed to convulse in sympathetic agony. The Rex were taking casualties too. She could see alien corpses scattered across the battlefield, their purple-black chitin fractured and leaking. But for every alien that fell, humanity lost 3 soldiers. The Devastator assault platforms finally arrived, their massive forms striding across the broken landscape like mechanical gods of war. Each step left crater-sized footprints in the tortured ground, their primary weapons particle beam cannons capable of melting through starship armor began targeting what remained of the human defensive positions. The first beam strike vaporized Bunker Complex 12, killing 37 Colonial Guard troops instantly. The second carved a smoking trench through the residential district, eliminating any hope of civilian evacuation from that sector. The third struck the colony's fusion power plant, creating a secondary explosion that lit up the sky like a small sun. Nexos realized with crystal clarity that her regiment was about to die. All of them, every man and woman under her command, would be dead within the next hour, their sacrifice barely slowing the Rex advance. The children in Shelter Complex 9 would follow shortly after, along with every other human soul on Epsilon 7. But as the 4th Devastator raised its particle cannon to finish off her command bunker, the ground beneath the massive war machine cracked open like an egg. What emerged was not steam or molten rock, but something that made the Rex's 3,000-year history of conquest seem like a brief, an insignificant footnote in the galaxy's true story. The planet was no longer just fighting back, it was waking up. The thing that rose from beneath the Devastator was impossible to describe in conventional terms. It moved like crystalline lightning given form, a writhing mass of mineral consciousness that had been dreaming in the planet's core for geological ages. When it touched the 100-meter-tall war machine, the Devastator's adamantine armor simply ceased to exist, not melted or destroyed, but transformed into something that was no longer matter. As humans understood it, the Rex pilot's final transmission was a harmonic scream that shattered every piece of glass in the colony. Before the signal cut to static, the other 5 Devastators immediately altered their targeting priorities, concentrating their particle beams on the geological anomaly. Their weapons, designed to crack planetary crusts, passed through the crystalline entity as if it were empty space. Commander Nexos watched through her tactical scope. As reality bent around the impossible creature, the very air seemed to crystallize in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. When Vrex soldiers fired their plasma weapons at the entity, their bolts simply vanished, absorbed into fractal geometries that existed in more dimensions than human minds could process. Sir, we're getting massive energy readings from subsurface formations across the entire continent, Sergeant Grimm reported, her voice shaking. Whatever that thing is, it's not alone. There are dozens of them. Down there, maybe hundreds. The battlefield transformed as more crystalline entities emerged from the fractured ground. What had been a conventional war between flesh and chitin became something else entirely, a conflict between matter-based consciousness and forces that operated by laws physics had yet to discover. The Vrex, for all their military sophistication, found themselves as helpless as insects against beings that could rewrite the fundamental nature of reality through thought alone. Lieutenant Vol grabbed Nexos's arm. We need to pull back. Whatever these things are, they're not discriminating between human and Vrex targets. He was right. One of the crystalline entities had emerged near the human defensive lines, and Colonial Guard troops were vanishing wherever its influence touched them, not dying, vanishing, as if they had never existed. Private Keller, who had killed his first alien warrior just minutes before, walked directly into the entity's crystalline field and simply wasn't there anymore. No scream, no struggle, no remains. Just absence. General withdrawal. Nexos commanded. All units fall back to Rally Point Delta. Avoid contact with unknown entities. The retreat became a nightmare of coordination. Human and Vrex forces found themselves fleeing in the same direction, sometimes fighting each other even as both species ran from beings that treated their war as an insignificant disturbance. Nexos watched her tactical display collapse into chaos as unit after unit lost contact, their transponder signals winking out without explanation. Sergeant Toll's heavy weapons squad had taken shelter in a bombed-out storage facility. When a crystalline entity phased through the walls, half her team's 6 trained soldiers became mathematical concepts that existed only in theoretical space. Toll herself survived by pure chance, crouched behind equipment that apparently didn't meet whatever criteria the entity used to determine reality from illusion. Command, this is Toll, came her shattered voice over the comm. The things, they're not killing us, they're editing us, making us not have existed in the first place. Across the battlefield, the Vrex were experiencing their own existential crisis. Their millennium-spanning empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, cataloged thousands of alien species, perfected warfare against every conceivable opponent, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for beings that operated outside the basic frameworks of cause and effect. A full battalion of Vrex assault troops simply stopped existing when they attempted to flank around one of the entities. Their weapons, their vehicles, their entire tactical formation became retroactive impossibilities. The Vrex command network, built around perfect information sharing and coordinated response, began fragmenting as units reported situations that violated everything they understood about reality. Nexos led her surviving troops through the ruins of the agricultural district, trying to reach the evacuation shuttles while avoiding both Vrex patrols and the roaming crystalline entities. They moved in small groups, communicating through hand signals and short-range burst transmissions to avoid detection. The colony's civilian population had become a secondary concern for both sides. Human and Vrex soldiers alike were too busy surviving encounters with beings that could unmake them with a thought. Nexos passed Shelter Complex 9 and found it partially phased into a crystalline matrix that extended into dimensions her eyes couldn't follow. She had no way of knowing if the children inside were dead, transformed, or existing in some state that had no name in any language. Corporal Rask's team encountered a group of fleeing Vrex soldiers near the colony's transit hub. Both groups stared at each other across 50 meters of open ground, weapons raised, but neither side opening fire. The aliens' mandibles clicked in what Nexos recognized as expressions of confusion and fear. One Vrex warrior gestured toward a nearby crystalline formation with its secondary arms. The universal symbol for what the hell is that thing? They're just as scared as we are, Vol whispered. A particle beam struck from one of the surviving devastators lit up the sky 3 kilometers away, targeting another crystalline entity. The beam struck the creature and reflected back along its path with doubled intensity, punching through the war machine's armor and detonating its reactor core. The explosion sent a mushroom cloud into the upper atmosphere, but the entity remained. completely unaffected. Nexos realized that humanity had stumbled into something far beyond their understanding. The bombardment that was supposed to be their death sentence had instead awakened forces that made both human and Rex military technology look like children's toys. The careful calculations and tactical doctrines that had shaped this war meant nothing when faced with beings that could rewrite the laws of physics on a whim. "Sir, we're getting a transmission from the Rex fleet," Grim reported. "It's on all frequencies." Directed at us, Nexos activated the communication channel. The voice that emerged spoke accented but clear standard human. "Terran forces, this is War Master Kithric of the Hegemony Third Fleet. Proposal, immediate ceasefire. These crystalline entities pose existential threat to both our species. Request tactical cooperation." For the first time in hours, Nexos smiled. The mighty Rex Empire, conquerors of 17 human worlds, wanted to negotiate, not because they had been defeated by human weapons or tactics, but because they had encountered something that made their ancient supremacy irrelevant. "War Master Kithric, this is Commander Nexos of the Terran Colonial Guard. Ceasefire accepted. But you should know we didn't wake these things up. Your bombardment did." The silence that followed was longer than interstellar communication lag could explain. The temporary ceasefire lasted exactly 47 minutes. It ended when the largest crystalline entity yet recorded emerged from the planet's core, directly beneath the Rex orbital command platform, ascending through 15 kilometers of solid rock as if it were empty vacuum. The platform, a battle station the size of a small moon, simply ceased to exist. 300,000 Rex personnel became retroactive impossibilities, edited out of the universe's equation without ceremony or explanation. War-Master Kithric survival shuttle crashed into Epsilon 7's northern hemisphere 12 minutes later. His escape pod, one of only 6 that managed to evacuate before the command platform, was unmade. When Nexos' search teams found him, the alien commander was in a state of catalytic shock that transcended species barriers. His mandibles clicked in rapid, meaningless patterns while his compound eyes stared at angles that corresponded to known geometry, the eternal archive. He whispered in standard human when Nexos approached his containment field. 3,000 years of conquest records, military doctrines from 50 species, star charts mapping the galaxy's inhabited systems, all of it was stored in the command platform's central core. Nexos understood the implications. Immediately, the Rex Empire's entire military infrastructure had been centralized in that one facility. Without it, their fleet coordination would collapse into chaos. Individual ship captains would be operating on outdated information, making tactical decisions without understanding the larger strategic picture. But the crystalline entities weren't finished. Across the planet's surface, more formations emerged with increasing frequency and power. Each one seemed to learn from its predecessors, their reality manipulation abilities growing more sophisticated and targeted. What had started as random geological chaos was evolving into something that resembled deliberate action. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy spikes from underground," reported Sergeant Grimm. "The entities are connecting somehow, forming some kind of network, and it's spreading to other areas of the planet through the tactical displays." Nexos watched the entities begin to coordinate their actions. 3 of them converged on a Rex armored division, their combined influence creating a zone where matter and energy obeyed entirely different rules. The alien vehicles found their armor plating converting to crystalline lattices that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. The crews died screaming as their bodies tried to adapt to geometric requirements that biology couldn't support. Human forces fared no better. Captain Mars Vast's airborne company attempted to evacuate civilians from the southern settlements when their dropships encountered an entity that had learned to manipulate electromagnetic fields. All 6 aircraft simply stopped working, not damaged or destroyed, but reduced to assemblies of metal and ceramic that had never been designed to fly. The ships fell like stones, crushing their passengers and crew against the increasingly unstable ground. The entity network was learning about warfare, incorporating techniques from both human and Rex tactical doctrines into its own strategic thinking. Nexos watched in horrified fascination as crystalline formations began adopting military formations, moving across the battlefield in coordinated patterns that suggested understanding of combined arms tactics. "They're studying us," she realized. "Every time we engage them, they learn something new about how we fight." Lieutenant Vole limped over to her position, his damaged arm now completely numb from nerve damage. Then we need to stop fighting them and start running. My scouts report at least 30 more entities emerging from deep core formations. At this rate, the entire planet will be overrun within 6 hours. But running wasn't an option. The Vrex orbital blockade remained in effect, preventing any escape from the planet's surface. Their surviving ships were pulling back to maximum safe distance, but their captains lacked the authority to order a full retreat. Without confirmation from the command hierarchy that no longer existed, the real battle began when the entities started actively hunting both human and Vrex forces. No longer content to emerge randomly from geological formations. They began pursuing military units with deliberate intent. Their ability to phase through solid matter made conventional fortifications useless, while their reality manipulation powers rendered most weapons ineffective. Nexos led the combined retreat toward the colony's primary spaceport, hoping to reach the few functional ships before the entities could cut them off. Behind them, the landscape transformed into something that belonged in no rational universe. Trees grew downward into the sky while mountains folded themselves into impossible angles. The very air shimmered with geometric patterns that caused seizures in anyone who looked at them directly. Sergeant Toll's rearguard action became a masterclass in fighting enemies that couldn't be killed by conventional means. Her heavy weapons teams learned to use their pulse cannons not to destroy the entities, but to disrupt their coherence long enough for other units to escape. The technique worked for exactly 12 minutes before the entities adapted, developing immunity to electromagnetic interference. Toll's down, screamed Private Jensen over the tactical frequency. The entity got her whole squad. Nexo switched to Toll's helmet camera and saw the sergeant's final moments. The crystalline entity had engulfed her position, transforming her soldiers into mathematical abstractions, while Toll herself fired her sidearm at something that existed in too many dimensions to target effectively. Her last transmission was a string of coordinates, the location of a weak point in the entity network that might allow the main force to break through. The information cost 37 more lives to exploit. Nexos led a desperate assault on the coordinates Toll had identified, using concentrated fire from every remaining heavy weapon to create a gap in the entity formation. The technique worked, but the entities immediately began filling the breach with reinforcements summoned from deep planetary formations. War-Master Kithrook, his shock therapy completed by human medics, provided crucial intelligence about Vrex fleet deployment patterns. The captain of the Annihilator-class vessel Sekhmeth has tactical autonomy for orbital bombardment, he explained through his translator device. If we can establish communication, he might be persuaded to provide fire support against the entities. The irony wasn't lost on Nexos. She was about to request orbital bombardment from the same aliens who had been trying to kill her people 6 hours earlier. But the entities represented a threat that transcended species boundaries. If they continued learning and adapting, they would eventually develop the ability to extend their influence beyond Epsilon 7's surface. The entire galaxy could face extinction by beings that could retroactively edit civilizations out of existence. The communication link with Captain Sekhmeth crackled with static interference as reality distortion spread across the planet. Human Commander, the Vrex officer's translated voice carried tones of desperate urgency. My sensors detect crystalline formations approaching escape velocity. If these entities achieve orbital insertion, the consequences could be irreversible. Nexos watched her tactical display as more red icons appeared across the battlefield. The entity network was expanding exponentially, each new formation more powerful and sophisticated than its predecessors. Her remaining 400 troops were trapped between alien forces they couldn't fight and allied forces they couldn't trust. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and humanity's survival depended on cooperation with the very enemies who had come to destroy them. The joint operation began at dawn on the second day, with human and Vrex forces coordinating their attacks for the first time in either species' history. Commander Nexos established her command post in the ruins of the colony's communication center, its reinforced walls providing some protection against the reality distortions that now covered 60% of the planet's surface. Through the shattered windows, she could see the entities moving with increasing coordination, their crystalline forms pulsing with energies that made her tactical equipment spark and fail. Combined assault begins in 30 seconds, she announced over the integrated communication network that Vrex technicians had jury-rigged to function. Despite the electromagnetic chaos, All units, remember, we're not trying to destroy these things. We're trying to disrupt their network long enough to evacuate. Lieutenant Vole, his left arm now in a combat sling, coordinated the human forces from the northern approach. His remaining 200 troops were a mixture of Colonial Guard regulars and civilian volunteers who had learned to fight during the past day's nightmare. Most carried Rex weapons scavenged from the battlefield, the alien plasma rifles proving more effective against entities that seemed immune to traditional projectile weapons. The Vrex contribution was more substantial. Captain Sekhmet had managed to land 3 companies of elite assault troops, their power and armor allowing them to operate in areas where reality distortions would kill unprotected humans. The aliens' tactical discipline remained intact despite their fear. Their formation movements precise even when facing enemies that violated every principle of physics they understood. Sergeant Grimm's sensor array, now boosted by Vrex detection equipment, provided real-time tracking of entity movements. I'm reading massive convergence patterns, she reported. They're pulling resources from all across the planet, concentrating everything into a single formation near the colony's fusion reactor. Nexo studied the tactical projection and felt her blood freeze. The entities weren't just randomly expanding their influence, they were building something. The convergence point corresponded exactly to the colony's primary power generation facility, where controlled fusion reactions produced enough energy to power the entire settlement. They're trying to access the reactor, she realized, if they can tap into that energy source. War Master Kithrick's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed the implications. Exponential expansion capability. With sufficient energy input, the entity network could extend influence to orbital altitudes within hours. From there, they could reach any vessel that approaches this system. The evacuation plan became a race against extinction, while Captain Sekhmet's orbital bombardment created temporary gaps in the entity network. Human and Vrex ground forces fought their way toward the fusion facility. Their objective wasn't to hold the position that was impossible, but to overload the reactor before the entities could establish control. The approach to the fusion facility became a corridor of death. The entities had anticipated the human Vrex strategy, concentrating their most powerful manifestations around the reactor complex. Corporal Rast's advanced team encountered the first defensive formation. 3 kilometers from their objective, a cluster of entities that had learned to weaponize gravity itself. Private Jensen watched his squad leader, Corporal Dex Marrow, walk into the gravitational anomaly and simply stretch into a thread of matter that extended across several light years of folded space. His scream lasted for subjective hours while occurring in nanoseconds of real time, the sound Doppler shifting through frequencies that human ears couldn't process. Breakthrough at Grid 77, reported Vrex squad leader Thickener over the translated communication channel, entity resistance increasing exponentially, requesting immediate support. Nexos coordinated the combined assault from her mobile command position, watching her tactical display fragment as reality distortions interfered with quantum communication links. The joint human-Vrex force was taking massive casualties, nearly 40% losses in the first hour of the advance, but they were making progress. Each successful breakthrough bringing them closer to the reactor complex. The entities adapted their defensive strategy with disturbing intelligence. When plasma weapons proved effective at disrupting their coherence, they developed countermeasures that absorbed and redirected energy attacks. When the joint forces used coordinated movement to avoid their reality manipulation fields, the entities began predicting tactical patterns and adjusting their positions accordingly. Lieutenant Vole led a flanking maneuver through the colony's industrial sector, his mixed human-Vrex squad moving through ruins that defied geometric logic. Buildings existed at impossible angles, their foundations extending into dimensions that caused vertigo in anyone who looked too closely. His pointman, Private Keller, somehow still alive despite several encounters with entity influence, reported structures that were simultaneously intact and destroyed, existing in quantum superposition until observed. "Sir, we've got massive movement at the reactor site," Sergeant Grimm announced, her voice tight with exhaustion. "The entities are pulling resources from across the continent. They are building something that registers on sensors as both matter and energy simultaneously." Through her tactical scope, Nexos watched the fusion facility transform into something that belonged to no rational universe. The reactor building expanded and contracted rhythmically, its walls breathing like living tissue while maintaining their structural integrity. Crystalline formations grew from the ground in spiral patterns that hurt to look at directly. their geometry incorporating mathematical principles that human science had never discovered. War Master Kithrick studied the sensor readings with the focused intensity of a military commander facing extinction. The entities are creating a resonance amplifier, he announced. They're going to use the fusion reactor's energy output to extend their influence beyond planetary boundaries. The final assault began with orbital bombardment. From Captain Sekhmeth's remaining weapons platforms, kinetic penetrators struck the crystalline formations around the reactor, their impact creating temporary disruptions in the entity network. But the entities quickly adapted, developing the ability to phase incoming projectiles into parallel dimensions, where they would impact harmlessly against versions of reality that contain no matter. Nexos led the ground assault personally, her remaining 150 human troops coordinating with 2 companies of Rex warriors. In a desperate push toward the reactor core, the approach became a nightmare of coordinated firepower and reality distortion, where successful tactics lasted only minutes before the entities developed countermeasures. Sergeant Toll's replacement, Corporal Maya Voss, died when an entity learned to manipulate the strong nuclear force, causing the atoms in her body to spontaneously undergo fission. The explosion vaporized her squad and created a radioactive crater that glowed with colors that had no names in any spectrum human eyes could perceive. The Vrex losses were equally severe. An entire platoon of their assault troops walked into a temporal distortion field and aged several centuries in seconds, their powered armor corroding around skeletons that crumbled to dust before their weapons finished firing. Their squad leader's final transmission was a mathematical equation that described the experience of dying across multiple timelines simultaneously. But the joint forces pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that failure meant not just death, but retroactive non-existence for their entire species. They fought through defensive positions that violated causality, where effects preceded causes and weapons fired before triggers were pulled. They adapted to battlefield conditions that changed the fundamental constants of physics from moment to moment. 50 meters from the reactor core, Nexos encountered the entity she would later describe in her official report as the primary intelligence. It towered above the battlefield like a crystalline mountain that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, its consciousness vast enough to encompass entire stellar systems. When it communicated, reality itself vibrated with frequencies that conveyed meaning directly to her neural cortex. "Why do you resist transformation?" the entity asked, its thoughts arriving in her mind as geometric patterns that her brain struggled to interpret. "We offer transcendence beyond your limited physical existence." Nexos raised her plasma rifle, knowing the weapon was useless against a being that could edit the laws of physics through thought alone. "Because we choose our own evolution," she replied, speaking the words aloud even though the entity perceived her thoughts directly. The primary intelligence's response came as a wave of mathematical concepts that temporarily expanded her consciousness across multiple dimensions. For a brief moment, Nexos experienced existence from the entity's perspective, a universe where matter and energy were merely suggestions, where consciousness could reshape reality through will alone, where death was just another variable to be manipulated in the cosmic equation. Then Lieutenant Vol's demolition charges detonated inside the reactor core, and everything changed. The fusion reactor's destruction created a cascade failure that propagated through the entity network like a virus in a computer system. As the controlled stellar fire that had powered Epsilon 7's civilization died in a cascade of liberated plasma, the crystalline beings found their carefully constructed resonance amplifier collapsing into quantum foam. Commander Nexos felt the primary intelligence's consciousness recoil as its connection to the planetary energy grid severed. The massive entity that had towered over the battlefield like a living mountain began to fracture, its 11-dimensional structure losing coherence as the network that sustained it fragmented. Around the fusion facility, smaller entities simply vanished, their exotic matter returning to whatever impossible realm had spawned them. "All units, fall back," Nexos commanded, her tactical display showing radiation levels climbing beyond lethal thresholds. Emergency evacuation protocols now. The retreat became a desperate race against the expanding plasma cloud that marked the reactor's death. Lieutenant Vol, his demolition mission complete, led the surviving assault teams away from Ground Zero, while Captain Sekhmeth's orbital platforms provided covering fire against the entities that still maintained coherence. The joint human Vrex force reduced to fewer than 200 survivors from both species. moved through the colony's ruins as reality slowly returned to recognizable patterns. Behind them, the crystalline formations that had transformed Epsilon-7's landscape began dissolving into geometric impossibilities. Buildings that had existed at impossible angles snapped back to conventional architecture, with audible cracks that echoed across the broken terrain. Mountains that had folded themselves into origami nightmares resumed their proper relationship with gravity and three-dimensional space. War-Master Kithrook, supported by the human medics after his containment field failed, managed to coordinate the evacuation, despite suffering from what the medical team classified as acute dimensional dissociation syndrome. His mandibles clicked in patterns that conveyed concepts human language couldn't express, mathematical descriptions of consciousness existing across multiple parallel realities simultaneously. The entities are withdrawing, he reported through his translator device, but not destroyed, returning to deep planetary core formations where they evolved before our bombardment awakened them. Sergeant Grimm's jury-rigged sensor array, now functional again as electromagnetic interference decreased, tracked the entity retreat into geological formations that sensors couldn't penetrate. "They're going dormant, sir," she announced. "Readings suggest they're returning to some kind of hibernation state." The evacuation ships arrived 8 hours later, a mixed fleet of human vessels and Vrex transports working in unprecedented cooperation. Captain Sarah Morrison of the Terran Navy destroyer Defiant later wrote in her log that watching human and alien personnel coordinate rescue operations was either the beginning of a new era in galactic relations or evidence that we're all suffering from collective hallucinations. The casualty reports made for grim reading. The 47th Colonial Guard Regiment had suffered 87% losses, with many of the survivors carrying injuries that would require years of rehabilitation. The Vrex forces had fared slightly better, losing 64% of their personnel to entities that could edit living beings out of existence on a whim. More than 30,000 colonists had died in the bombardment and subsequent chaos, their names added to the growing list of casualties in humanity's first interstellar war. But the strategic implications of the battle extended far beyond Epsilon-7's devastated surface. For the first time in their 3,000-year history of conquest, the Vrex Empire had encountered forces that made their technological superiority irrelevant. The destruction of their orbital command platform had crippled their fleet coordination, while the loss of the Eternal Archive had effectively reset their military doctrine to primitive levels. War-Master Kithrook, his mind slowly recovering from dimensional trauma, provided intelligence that would reshape humanity's understanding of galactic politics. The Hegemony Council will interpret this outcome as evidence of fundamental weakness in Vrex military doctrine, he explained during his debriefing sessions. Other species will see opportunity in our demonstrated vulnerability. 3 weeks after the evacuation, Nexos found herself in the unprecedented position of negotiating humanity's first interstellar peace treaty. The Vrex Empire, faced with the collapse of their centralized command structure and the revelation that the galaxy contained forces beyond their control, offered terms that would have been unthinkable before the entity encounter: full withdrawal from all human territorial claims. Nexos read from the treaty document while addressing the Colonial Defense Council via quantum communications link. Recognition of humanity as a sovereign species with equal standing in galactic affairs. Joint research cooperation regarding entity phenomena and planetary awakening protocols. The terms were so favorable that several council members suspected a trap, but the intelligence reports were clear the Vrex Empire was fracturing as individual fleet commanders made independent decisions without central coordination. Some were withdrawing to defend core worlds. Others were negotiating separate peace agreements with species they had previously conquered, and a few were even defecting to join multi-species alliances. Captain Sekhmeth, now serving as the Vrex Empire's unofficial ambassador to humanity, explained the situation with characteristic alien directness. The entities demonstrated that military supremacy based on conventional physics is an illusion. Any species that can awaken planetary consciousness possesses ultimate strategic advantage. The Hegemony Council no longer considers conquest of human space to be viable. But the most significant long-term consequence was the knowledge that Epsilon-7's entities were not unique. Planetary surveys across human space began detecting similar crystalline formations on dozens of worlds, dormant consciousnesses that had been sleeping in planetary cores for millions of years. The implications were staggering. Humanity had been colonizing worlds that contained beings of immense power, beings that could be awakened by the right combination of energy and circumstance. Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of the few civilian survivors from Shelter Complex 9, published research suggesting that the entities represented a form of planetary consciousness that evolved naturally in certain types of crystalline substrates. They're not aliens in the conventional sense, she wrote in her landmark paper on xenogeological awareness. They're what planets become when they achieve sufficient complexity and energy density. 6 months later, Nexo stood in the memorial garden that had been built on the ruins of Epsilon 7's residential district. The crystalline formations had left the ground transformed, creating natural sculptures that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. No one lived on the planet anymore. It had been designated a research preserve, where scientists from a dozen species studied the intersection of consciousness and geology. Lieutenant Vol, his arm restored through Vreck's medical technology provided as part of the peace negotiations, joined her at the memorial wall that listed the names of every human and Vreck's soldier who had died in the battle. "Think they're still down there?" he asked, gesturing toward the ground beneath their feet. Nexos nodded, checking her radiation scanner out of habit, even though the levels had dropped to safe ranges months ago. Sleeping again, dreaming whatever it is that planetary consciousnesses dream about. Above them, ships from half a dozen species maintained orbital watch, their crews monitoring for any signs of renewed entity activity. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one fully understood yet. The old certainties about military power and technological supremacy had been replaced by the knowledge that consciousness itself might be the universe's ultimate force. As they walked back toward the research station that had been built from the ruins of the Colonial Administration building, Nexos reflected on the irony that had defined the battle. The Vrecks had come to Epsilon 7 to demonstrate their overwhelming superiority through methodical bombardment. Their laughter during the attack had been the sound of predators who believed themselves untouchable. But the ground had laughed back with a voice that spoke in frequencies older than starlight, and that laughter had rewritten the rules of galactic civilization forever. Humanity's first victory in their interstellar war hadn't come through superior weapons or tactics, but through awakening forces that made such distinctions meaningless. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor about the pretensions of matter-based civilizations, and when planets themselves joined the cosmic joke, even the mightiest empires learned to listen rather than laugh.